Kurt Warner joining us right now on Willard and Dibs. What a treat. How fun is this? How are you, Kurt? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're great, man. I know you've been doing we're seeing it, a lot of the deep dive stuff, videos on the NFL, certain quarterbacks. Why don't you give everybody your take on what we're seeing from Brock Purdy, particularly in these last 3 games?
I think you're seeing good play from Brock Purdy in these last 3 games. I mean, obviously there's things that you would love to change. He's thrown more interceptions, obviously, in the last 3 than he's thrown in his entire NFL career. So everybody is going to hang on those things. But if you look at the entirety of how he's playing, you break down it play by play, he's still playing really, really good football. They haven't been able to finish as much as they did early in the year. Their defense obviously isn't playing nearly as well. And so one of the big factors is they find themselves down late in games. And I've always said it, this offense is built around, running the football and play action. They're not built to come from behind. They're not built to be a drop back team. And so when you get into that mode, it's a little bit more difficult for them. And because Kyle's so good and the offense has been so good, they don't find themselves in that situation very often. But, you've heard the stats. I heard the stats on how few times they've come back when they've been down in games. And so much of it is because, A, they're not down that much, and B, they're built a little bit differently to stay ahead and to play a certain way. And so when you force the quarterback into those kind of situations where you have to throw and make every throw to win games, that's when mistakes happen, no matter who you are. But overall, Brock is still playing really good football.
Is that inability to come back by personnel, by scheme, or by both in terms of just how Kyle Shanahan builds this roster and goes about running his offense?
Well, I'm a believer that when you build an offense a certain way, you have to obviously spend a lot of time focused in on what you want to do and how you want to build it. So when you run the football really well, you spend a lot of time on the run game. When you play action off of it and you build your pass game more on the play action, you're going to spend a lot of time on it. So when it comes to drop back game, if that's not what you primarily do is spread it out and play drop back football, you're never going to spend as much time on it. You're not going to be as nuanced and as good overall in that area. You look at different teams around the league, like the Tennessee Titans. They're built around Derrick Henry. They're built around play action. When you get them into a situation where they have to come back and play drop back football, they're not nearly as good. And so, there's a certain teams around the league that are built that way. And so I think it's as much scheme as anything. I think it's as much, timing and spending time doing it so you get really, really good. So much of the pass game with the 49ers, and again, they can throw it all over and they've got good plays down the field, but they're so good at getting the ball out of their hands to George Kittle and to Debo and to Christian and allowing those guys to make big plays that becomes also a big part of their drop back or pass game is getting the ball out quick to those players. And so it's the nature of how things work is, when you're a drop back pass team, you're not usually as good running the football and dominating in that area because you don't spend as much time on it. And that really is what it comes down to is what do you want to be? What do you want to focus your time on? Those are the things you're going to be best at. And San Francisco's really good at what they're best at. But when they find themselves behind, as we've seen the last few games, they're not quite as efficient, from what I've seen.
Okay, so Kurt Warner's joining us. That makes all kinds of sense. But I do think fans will go, well, that's a flaw that we don't want the team to have. So is that right? Is that a trade-off that makes sense to you?
Yes, when you're really good at what you do, that's the trade-off you make. When you build a team, you look at it and go, okay, what are we going to be good at? How are we built? What is our personnel? What do we want to spend our time on because we feel like we can dominate or be at our best when we do these things? And so I was on teams that didn't run the ball very well. When I was in Arizona, we didn't run the ball well at all. We were 32nd in the league in running the football, but we were really good at throwing the football because we were built around 3 wides, 4 wides, the things we did well, the things that I did well. And so running the ball, took a bit of a back seat. So we didn't design crazy runs or, develop our run game to the nth degree because it wasn't where we were going to, hover. Did we want to be better at it? Of course we did. We wanted to run the ball really, really well, but you're not going to spend all your time in practice doing something that you're not really good at. And so, yeah, I think every team has a trade-off. There's not any team in the league that's great at everything. You pick and choose where you want to play, how you want to play. And again, let's look at San Francisco. They're really good at running the football and play action. They live in that world, and they've dominated in that world for years. So is it a trade-off to go, okay, we're not going to be great in the drop-back game and, be in a situation where we're great at coming back from behind? So what? We're going to be ahead. We're going to dominate the line of scrimmage, and we're going to be ahead in most games so we can play our style. And it's the same thing. If you get down, or if you're ahead late in the fourth quarter and you have to throw the football because that's what you're good at, there's more opportunities to allow the other team to come back. San Francisco, they're really good at running the football. So they get ahead late in games, and you're leaning back on the things you do well. You dominate, you finish, you win a lot of games because of it. So, I think it's more than a good trade-off because they're really good in the other two facets of offense.
Does this partly, and that's a great breakdown, Kurt. I want to make sure that gets put out there because I absolutely love what you're saying. Does this kind of lead into your praise of Brock Purdy in that his style of quarterbacking marries perfectly with what Kyle tries to do out of the 21 personnel, the stretch run game, and the play action?
The big question that we're always going to have is, I've only seen Brock in one system. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, well, Brock is, only good in this system or this plays perfectly to his skill set. I believe Brock's a good quarterback. When what I see, the way he reads the field, the plays that he makes, the way that he's able to layer and time and throw the football, I think he can be good in a lot of systems. But does he fit what they're trying to do? Yes. I mean, he plays this system really, really well. And again, I think there's a lot of quarterbacks that can play well in this system because the system's good and they've got good players, and it sets itself up for quarterbacks to have success. But, we don't really know that, and we won't know that about Brock unless he finds himself in another system and has to show us what he's capable of. But so much of life, I've always said it, all quarterbacks are system quarterbacks. You try to find a system that plays to the strengths of your quarterbacks, and it sure looks like this system fits Brock Purdy really, really well.
Yeah, Kurt Warner with us, Willard and Dibs. I've often used you and your career as an example of this conversation, so I've always wanted to ask you this in terms of how much the surroundings matter for a quarterback, the coach, the system, the teammates, because you looked like one player with the Rams and the Cardinals. It looked a little different with the Giants, Kurt, right? So, what's going on there?
Well, there's no question that players matter. There's no question that scheme and coaching matters. I mean, that's important in every scheme. You can't go back to any great players and say, oh, he was great by himself. They didn't have great players. Or he was great and he was playing in a terrible system that didn't get guys open or didn't play to his strengths. The biggest thing for me with New York was we didn't play football the way I played football. We wanted to be 3 yards in a cloud of dust. We wanted to throw the ball on third down. And that's not how I was built as a quarterback. I was a guy that wanted it spread out. I wanted to throw the ball more often. I wanted to get 5 guys out. And that's just not what we did. We weren't built that way. Our offensive line they weren't great at pass blocking. They were good run blockers. Tiki Barber was kind of the center of what we were doing offensively and the weapons that we had. So it was just different. And so, you just have sometimes when you bounce around like I did, you have to play a little bit differently. But where I had my greatest success was, again, in systems that played to my strengths, that allowed me to do what I felt I was best at, spread it out, throw it down the field, attack that second level. And when you find yourself in a system that doesn't fit that, it's much harder to be successful. And that's why I say all quarterbacks are system quarterbacks. You want to play and you want to find a system that fits you so you can excel to your highest potential. And sometimes you find yourself in systems that don't, and you still have to find ways to win and be successful, but you have to realize you've got to do it a little bit away from your strength. Can
the Shanahan system be one that wins in the biggest games and at the highest level? Because you already laid out, Kurt, that when Shanahan's behind, this system has a difficult time of catching up and getting over the hump late into a ball game. Is this system really one that can win in January and in February?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's just look at the idea here of most teams when they fall behind by a touchdown or 2 touchdowns late in the game don't come back and win. So that stat is probably going to be the same for most people, that you're going to have a higher losing percentage when you're down late in the game than you will have a winning percentage. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is they just don't find themselves there very often. So the system is built not to find yourself down, to be able to dominate in the trenches and where you have to win, I believe, at playoff time to win Super Bowls for the most part, or teams that can win the line of scrimmage, can run the football, and don't find themselves having to play catch-up very often. So we've already seen that, Kyle Shanahan, whether he was an offense coordinator, in Super Bowls, whether he's the head coach, in Super Bowls. So, yes, this team and this system, without a doubt, can win championships. But you have to play to your strengths, and you have to play your best football in those moments. And, of course, you got to try to fight from being down late in a game where you have to come back to win, because that's hard for anybody, any quarterback, any system.
Kurt Warner with us here, Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Kurt, big story out here. Maybe it shouldn't be. Steve Wilks, defensive coordinator, moving from the booth to the sideline. In your career, how important was it that the offensive coordinator was down on the sideline so you could talk to him?
Most of the time that I was playing, my offense coordinator was down on the sideline. So I'm trying to think of a time where that wasn't the case. But most of the time that was the case. And I don't know how important it is. I mean, as long as I can have those conversations with my offense coordinator and he's seeing the field and understand what I'm seeing, it doesn't really matter to me where they're at, where they're sending the plays in from. I think too often we get caught up with these things and like, oh, the last 3 weeks haven't been as good as they were before. Let's make a change. Well, what about the first 5 weeks when they were dominating and they were the best defense in the league? And, and I look back to that Minnesota game and, I saw Coach Wilks have to apologize for the blitz zero or the all-out blitz that they brought at the end of the half. And I'm thinking to myself, man, Ward had the ball in both hands. I mean, make an interception right there, and we're not having this conversation. So I just think sometimes we have these knee-jerk reactions to going through stretches where we don't play our best. And we want to point the finger at one person or another, or one situation or another. And I think we just, sometimes we overcompensate instead of just going, you know what? Bottom line is we got to get back to playing good football. We got to get back to making the plays that we need to make. If I'm a coach, calling plays that give us better opportunities to succeed, because we're a good football team. And I look at San Francisco, and that's what I say is like, nothing crazy needs to happen. They just need to play up to their potential. And I believe it kind of starts up front. That's the biggest thing, is they're not getting the same kind of pressure with 4 that they've got in the past. Bosa, to me, hasn't really, since he came back from that holdout, really got back into that form where he's dominating, the position as he has in the past. And so we can point at a coordinator, and especially when you make a change. D'Amico's doing great, obviously did great things there. When we make a change and then you go through a period like this, like, oh my gosh, it's the new coordinator. I think the biggest thing is you start getting the same type of pressure with your front 4, with the players they have at the linebacker and on the back end. This team is going to be right there in the mix. They're going to be playing in one of the best defenses in the National Football League. And we're going to forget all about this conversation, but they have to get back to playing that way. And the 49er way has always been. It's not about bringing pressure. It's not about designing this, creative blitz scheme. It's about winning with 4 guys rushing the passer and allowing everybody else to run around, rally, and attack downhill. That's what makes them their best. That's what they were doing earlier in the year, specifically on the back end. And that's what they haven't done during this win streak. And that's, to me, where it starts.
Yeah, I love the definition of knee-jerk reaction, because that's basically our business, Mark and I here on Sports Talk Radio, is dealing with the knee-jerk reaction. And part of that is reactions about Brock Purdy and people ready to jump off the Brock bandwagon. What have you seen in the last 3 games, the losses, that are different maybe from the first 5 games that they won?
You're talking with Brock or with them?
Yeah, just with Brock in particular.
Well, again, you guys saw the breakdown, and I know that's why you reached out to me. And, in the breakdown, I showed it, and it was obviously in a loss to Cincinnati, but the kid made play after play after play, and it was big play after big play. And when things weren't there, he was running around making other plays with his feet. He's playing good. Is he making some mistakes? So the interception down in the red zone, yes, he probably should have handed it off, and there was kind of a funky look, but should have handed it off. And then whatever. Instead, it's a crazy interception by Pratt, that goes the other direction. Otherwise, they score there, even a field goal, and they're right in that football game. I think it was a 7-point game at that point. He has another interception, which, again, I broke it down, and it was one of those good play by the defense, but, scheme-wise, I thought they maybe could have helped him. He had to kind of throw it over somebody, but those things happen. Go back to the Minnesota game. They were right there in that Minnesota game. I mentioned it. The interception, if they intercept the ball at the end of the first half, I believe San Francisco wins that football game. But they're right there, and they're late in the game, and he's got to push the ball down the field, and there's a couple of mistakes. One timing mistake that leads to an interception. The other one is a forced ball because they're in a late game situation trying to come back. When I look at quarterback play, the crazy thing is that you can go 27 for 33 in a game, and if those 6 passes hit the ground, right? If they hit the ground, you're 27 for 33, 300 yards, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this guy's awesome. You can go 27 for 33, and 3 of those passes get intercepted because, in a normal game, you're going to make so many mistakes as a quarterback. Whether they get intercepted or not defines everything, right? Like look at my career in Super Bowls. Okay. So, when I was playing, against the Titans, we obviously won that game. Against the Patriots, I throw for 360 yards, whatever. We score in the last minute, and Brady comes down and they kick a field goal. So we lose that game, and I never got to see the ball again. We scored to go ahead against Pittsburgh, and they got the ball back with like 25 seconds, not in a position to score. So if you just switch the final score of those games, what would people say about my career in the Super Bowls because of the yards I threw for and the records I had? But because we lost, people say, well, he's 1-2 in Super Bowls and blah. And that I wouldn't have had to do anything differently in terms of playing, and people would see my career completely differently from a Super Bowl standpoint. So that's what I'm saying is that quarterbacks can play really well, and somebody throws 3 balls that should have been intercepted and they're not. The other guy throws 3 balls that should have been intercepted and they are, and we get these dramatically different looks at, oh my gosh, he threw 2 interceptions, he had a horrible game and they lost. That to me just isn't the case with Brock. I think he's playing really good football. He's not playing perfect. He's made some mistakes. They found themselves in different situations, but we can't just take those interceptions and automatically say he's playing bad because he's got this many interceptions in the last 3 games and he didn't have any before that. It's just not the case. Yes, he's made a couple mistakes. Yes, he's thrown a couple bad balls. Okay, that doesn't mean he's playing bad football, and that's how I look at it when I watch the tape and I break it down play by play, because that's what I do, is I look at each play and I go, did he win this play? Did he do the right thing? Did he make the right play on this play? So if you do that 27 out of 33 times in the NFL, that's a really good game for a quarterback, regardless of whether those 3 interceptions or those other 6 plays have 3 interceptions or not.
Those of you looking to win your way into Knockout at Chase Center, the window is open. More on that coming up in just a sec. We're with Kurt Warner here on Willard and Dibs. Hey, Kurt, with all that said, have you seen enough so that if you were the 49ers, you would be thinking, we're ready to commit to this guy long term?
Well, again, I love what he does in the system. And so what I always say is that the crazy thing about playing quarterback in this league is that, usually until you prove that you're that guy, so like a Patrick Mahomes or a Joe Burrow, people always have questions. You play your first game or your first season and you're undefeated, but okay, we still have questions. I want to see him do it again. Okay, you get in a position where you're behind in 3 games and you lose those 3 games. I want to see a little bit more. And so you have to continually answer questions. My first year, we won the Super Bowl. I won the MVP, and everybody just said, well, that was great, but let's see him do it again. I'm not sure I believe it because it could have been a fluke one year. So that happens at the quarterback position is you have to keep checking these boxes on, are you the guy? And so for me with Brock, I've seen enough to say this guy's a really good quarterback, and especially really good in this system. I haven't seen enough to say this guy is one of those elite guys that can win games with his right arm. And that, to me, is the final qualifier to be elite or to be a franchise quarterback, that when you don't have all the stuff around you, can you still win games with your right arm? And so, and again, I say that saying I've seen a lot. He's checked a lot of boxes. That's where I'd like to see a little bit more in these kind of situations and see where he's at. But I want to qualify that with, let's think back to Tom Brady through his first 3, 4, 5 years in the National Football League. He was not that guy. He had not checked that box. And so when we look back at certain guys, Ben Roethlisberger had not checked that box. Eventually there comes a time when they have to prove that they're that guy. And if you are, you separate yourself, you become elite, you become one of those special players. If you can't, you become a really good player, but maybe not in the elite category. And so let's just not say, all these guys that were great eventually in their career, they weren't necessarily that guy early on. And so Brock, let's give him time. He's done great things in the short period of time in this system, things that make you go, man, this kid is a really good quarterback and has played really good quarterback in this league pretty much his entire career. Doesn't mean he's a finished product. Doesn't mean he's shown us everything that we need to know about can he be a franchise guy, so to speak, be an elite quarterback in this league. But let's give him time to do that. I don't need to rush that. I don't need to push the envelope. Like, he's got to be that guy in his first year. He's got to be that guy in his first 15 games, because there's a lot of other great quarterbacks that were not that guy through the first few years of their career, and they develop into it, or they eventually get opportunities where they maybe don't have quite the supporting cast around them, like Brady. They won a lot with defense and running the football early on. I think in the first Super Bowl they beat us, he threw for 150 yards. And so let's give him time to show what all he can be. But I've seen enough to say he's a starting quarterback in the National Football League, and he fits perfectly with what San Francisco's trying to do.
Kurt, just great stuff. Thanks for hanging for so long. We just didn't want to let you go. We wanted to get to all those questions, and your answers were fantastic, man. Thank you for taking the time.
You got it, guys. Take care.